Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third annual award for Research Data Stewardship. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shay Swager, and I'll be part of hosting this event. This award celebrates partnerships between companies and researchers who share data for scientific discovery and broad social impact. People you'll hear from today are the best of the best. They're setting new standards of ethical data practices and privacy-oriented research, and should be considered an exemplar in both industry and academia. This award is supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, a not-for-profit grant-making institution whose mission is to enhance the welfare of all through the advancement of scientific knowledge, and we want to thank the foundation for their support. The Future of Privacy Forum is involved in lots of projects like this award that aim to progress data sharing for research. Just last year, we released something called the Playbook, Data Sharing for Research. We also host a monthly working group called Ethics and Data in Research that I run that I would love all of you to join. And we have a forthcoming series of case studies about data sharing for research. In a few minutes, you're going to hear directly from this year's award winners about their incredible work, but I wanted to take just a minute and celebrate this year's runner-up for the award. So a huge congratulations to Jeff White from Gravy Analytics and Dr. Shilei Zhao from the University of Florida's Transportation Institute for their project called Using Location Analytics to Enhance Natural Disaster Emergency Response Planning and Management. This collaboration between the University of Florida and Gravy Analytics used secure mobility data to study the movements, timing, and evacuation paths of local residents during multiple wildfires in the U.S. Their research can benefit the general public, but especially those who live in areas vulnerable to wildfires, and it can help mitigate some of those risks. One of the goals of this award is to showcase some of the excellent research that takes place at institutions that you may be less familiar with. We're particularly proud that the University of Florida is a public land-grant institution and an emerging Hispanic-serving institution. There is a critical need not only to make research more inclusive, but also to celebrate the amazing work that's already happening at places like UF. So again, congratulations to Jeff White at Gravy Analytics and Dr. Shilei Zhao at the University of Florida. If you want to, and you probably should because it's awesome, you should read about their research at the award announcement page on the FPF website. I now have the absolute privilege of introducing to you our keynote speaker, Congresswoman Lori Trahan. So a little bit about her. She proudly represents Massachusetts' 3rd Congressional District. But before running for Congress in 2018, she worked as a congressional staffer for nearly a decade before leaving for the private sector in the mid-2000s, where she held a number of positions, including an executive role at an ad tech startup in Cambridge. Since she took office in 2019, Congresswoman Trahan has established herself as a leader in lawmaking for technology and policy issues, including transparency requirements, child protections, privacy rights, and so much more. As a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Innovation, Data, and Commerce Subcommittee, she has led the introduction of a number of technology-focused bills, including the Digital Service Oversight and Safety Act, the TLDR Act, and the DELETE Act. In addition to her legislative work, she has successfully pressured Meta to suspend its development of an Instagram for Kids, pressed Elon Musk on Twitter's new paid API access for researchers, and push data brokers and messaging services to share information on how women's reproductive and location data is collected and used following the Supreme Court's decision last year to overturn Roe versus Wade. So now a word from Congresswoman Trahan. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Shay, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to the entire team here at Future of Privacy Forum for the opportunity to join you all to celebrate this year's winners of the Award for Research Data Stewardship. Since its creation in 2020, this award has recognized organizations that exemplify how data and technology in responsible hands can be used to benefit and improve society as a whole. And for far too long, consumers here in the United States and around the globe have grown accustomed to a digital environment that not only fails to deter big tech companies from invading our privacy for financial gain, but an ecosystem where that kind of win-at-all-costs behavior is actively rewarded. While many of us have expressed serious concern about the data and design practices of large platforms for a long time, we've gotten to the point where younger generations are resigned to the fact that their every action online is surveilled. Their most sensitive data is being collected, and platforms and services are actively being designed to keep them logged on for as long as possible. To them, that's the cost of staying connected with friends on social media, completing schoolwork with EdTech, and playing online games. The alternative, not having access to a platform, just isn't an option. That has allowed companies to get away with highway robbery, and for a while, they've done so with next to no repercussions for data and privacy abuses. In fact, up until the most recent FTC action taken against Meta, companies have largely seemed okay with operating fast and loose with the rules to make a lot of money, and they viewed any potential fines as the cost of doing business. All the while, policymakers, reporters, watchdogs, and everyday consumers have become reliant on courageous individuals at these massive companies who see this pattern and decide to blow the whistle. The winners and honorable mentions of this year's award for research data stewardship are proof that the system doesn't have to work that way. They're proof that data can be shared with researchers in a privacy protective way, and that it's good for companies to do that so the pros and cons of a platform or a company can be studied independently. I don't consider myself a cynical person, but I'm at the point now where I have to physically stop myself from rolling my eyes when Instagram tells me how safe their platform is for young girls, like my 2 young daughters. Companies just don't have the incentive to conduct detailed research on the harms that exist on their platforms. And when they do, they certainly aren't going to share their findings in full if it means having to hurt their profitability by making large changes to how their service works. Ensuring that independent researchers can take a look under the hood of these companies is essential to holding big tech executives accountable to the promises that they make to their users. That's why the work that you all do is so important, proving that this can be done in a responsible way on both the researcher and company sides. But it's also why I share many of the same concerns you all have regarding the steps some companies have taken in recent months to turn off. Companies have limited researcher access more than Twitter since Elon Musk took over the platform. And despite multiple requests for additional information and clarity on the future of the researcher API, the company continues to move in the wrong direction. At the same time, TikTok recently announced a researcher access program. I asked Mr. Chu about this new initiative because it has a number of glaring issues that threaten to limit researchers' ability to effectively study harms on the platform. This changing landscape, combined with the implementation of policies abroad like the Digital Services Act in Europe, are exactly why Congress should be moving to implement a comprehensive transparency package that creates uniform standards for researcher access. Last year, I introduced legislation that would meet this need. The Digital Services Oversight and Safety Act, or DSOSA for short, would establish that national transparency and accountability framework that Americans deserve to ensure the responsible operation of technology and the internet. It would ensure that companies comprehensively assess and mitigate the systemic risks inherent in the development and operation of their products. Meaning Meta executives can't bury their head in the sand when their platform is used to incite an insurrection, or AI developers can't rush forward without putting in writing their assessment of what could go wrong with their technology and what they will do to prevent that from happening. But most importantly for our discussion today, it creates an Office of Independent Research Facilitation tasked with standing up and overseeing a system through which certified researchers can study the impacts of platforms and their content moderation practices, product design decisions, and algorithms. Of course, many of the ideas in DSOSA originated and were workshopped with some of you here today. And I'm grateful to all of you for your work, as well as those of my colleagues in Congress who are just as passionate as I am about this issue. Senators Coons and Portman's approach with the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act helped push the conversation about researcher access and transparency to the forefront, making it just essential in the conversation about tech policy as privacy and antitrust, which have garnered most of the attention over the past few years. Like many of you, I believe that each of these policy prongs are essential to creating a safer, more consumer-friendly internet. That's why, in addition to passing DSOSA or PATA or another comprehensive transparency policy, we need to continue the hard work that was done to advance the American Data Privacy Protection Act out of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's time to treat Americans' privacy like the fundamental right it is by putting an end to invasive data collection and giving consumers full control over their digital identities. And your continued advocacy is going to be critical in ensuring passage of legislation that finally gets us there. But so too is the work you're doing to demonstrate that the policies we're pushing to pass are not only doable from the perspective of companies, but also enormously effective. I was impressed by the work of this year's award winners, Optum and the Mayo Clinic, to de-identify, secure, and limit the transmission of some of the most sensitive data you can collect before using it to better our understanding of medical interventions for diabetes. As someone who serves on both the data and health subcommittees in the House, that kind of responsible data use is a breath of fresh air. And it's all the more motivation to bring laws that govern the treatment of our data and privacy up to the level you are already operating at. So congratulations again to this year's award for Research Data Stewardship winner and honorable mention on your great work. And thank you again to everyone here today and at the Future of Privacy Forum for all that you do to get us closer to a better, safer internet for everyone. Thank you, and back to you, Shay.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Trahan. I really appreciate you joining us, all of your work, and I think a lot of what you said is probably going to come up in the discussion later on. So again, appreciate you very much. I am also very excited to introduce to you the winners of this year's award for Research Data Stewardship, Dr. Maywish Kasim of Optum and Dr. Rosalina McCoy of the Mayo Clinic for their project titled Predicting the Risk of Severe Hypoglycemic and Hyperglycemic. Oh, I lost my window. There we go. Events in adults with diabetes. So our first presenter, you'll hear from both of them, is Dr. Maywish Kasim. Dr. Kasim is a distinguished leader on the Academic and Advocacy Partnership team with Optum and part of United Health Group. She holds a PhD in health services research and has spent the last decade honing her skills at United Health Group, where she's held a range of roles in research and analysis and driving strategic programs. For the last 5 years, she has led various academic partnerships, bringing a wealth of knowledge and deep expertise to these collaborations. Her work has been invaluable in shaping policies and programs and driving innovation in the field. She is also a new third-time mom, dialing in from her maternity leave, and in 2 weeks, she will add Harvard graduate to her list of impressive accomplishments. Our second presenter is Dr. Rosalina McCoy. Dr. McCoy is an associate professor of medicine and vice chair for research in the Mayo Clinic Division of Community Internal Medicine, Geriatrics, and Palliative Care, based in Rochester, Minnesota, where she practices as a general internist and endocrinologist and serves as medical director of the Mayo Clinic Ambulance Community Paramedic Services. Dr. McCoy is an NIH and PCORI-funded clinician scientist whose work leverages real-world data to improve the quality, equity, and accessibility of diabetes care. She received her undergraduate degree from Harvard, medical degree at Johns Hopkins, completed her medical training in internal medicine and endocrinology at the Mayo Clinic, and has been on faculty at Mayo Clinic since 2015. I welcome you both, and I will turn it over first to you, Dr. Kasim.
Thank you so much, Shay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, and this is a wonderful recognition. It's truly an honor to be here. I'd like to start by providing a brief introduction of Optum's mission and vision. So like Shay said in my introduction, I am part of Optum. We are a diverse team of curious thinkers driven to help United Health Group meet its mission, which is to help people live healthier lives and make the health system work better for everyone. Our vision, it's to create the most effective, affordable, equitable, and engaging healthcare solutions for our customers, the patients, payers, providers. And we do that by leveraging big data insights, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and disruptive product development while capitalizing on engineering, clinical, and scientific innovations. Our collaboration with Mayo Clinic goes back a decade, where in 2012, Mayo Clinic and Optum created an open collaborative research center focused on retrospective research. What distinguishes this from other efforts is that it emphasized multidisciplinary collaboration and partner-initiated work. Rosalina will speak in depth a little bit more about this, but she was involved at the inception of the collaboration under her mentor. It was her initial project on hospitalizations among people with diabetes that led her to identify hypo and hyperglycemia as major problems and complications. And lastly, the importance of, I touched on this just briefly, importance of bringing together that expertise in all of these domains, which is around data management, privacy, data analysis, and the clinical perspective. With this collaboration and any collaboration that uses Optum data, we have specific protections, procedures, and processes in place that protect health information and healthcare privacy. We carefully manage access to the data to ensure appropriate use. And the first is the focus on de-identifying data. We employ certified de-identified data sets that follow HIPAA guidelines, and any matching of individuals across multiple data sources is done in a way that preserves that statistical de-identification. Furthermore, Optum prohibits any attempts to re-identify individuals in the data. We also establish limits on sharing and use of PHI. Any files containing PHI are prohibited from being transferred according to our privacy policy. Users are therefore only allowed access to data under an agreement with Optum and only from approved locations. Every user is trained, authenticated, and authorized before gaining access to data, as well as being provided credentials with multi-factor authentication. Limiting the transmission of data. Our partners use virtual desktop infrastructure, VDIs, to explore the data, conduct research, and access Optum data. We also use secure file transfer accounts to move any files in and out of the VDI infrastructure, for example, in preparation for publication. And any inbound and outbound files are reviewed for compliance with our data policy. Data are only transmitted via encrypted channels such as virtual private networks, VPNs, encrypted file transfers, or secure file transfers. Lastly, we have physical and technical safeguards as well. Optum systems are housed in a secure facility with physical controls to limit access and are monitored 24 hours a day. We also employ technical safeguards, including encryption, identity management, to prevent improper access, use, or disclosure of the data. We also have a multi-party review of each research proposal for the appropriate use of data before allowing access. So Optum ensures that each user is trained, authenticated, and authorized. Rosalina will speak a little bit more about this, but at a high level, we'd like to emphasize the importance of accessible private data. This collaboration uniquely made possible for important research to be conducted that led to a broader public benefit and impact to diabetes management. And it was uniquely possible because of the variety of data, the veracity, rigorous and standardized data cleaning, validation, linkage, and strong and comprehensive safeguards along with that multidisciplinary collaboration. A brief description of the data here before I hand off to Rosalita. Optum data are comprehensive real-world data with over 200 million de-identified commercial and Medicare Advantage lives across claims and clinical information. The database contains longitudinal health information on patients representing a diverse mixture of ages and geographical locations across the United States. And so researchers have access to administrative claims, lab results as an example, electronic health record or clinical data, pharmacy claims, geography, cost and utilization, among other factors. And that concludes my brief overview.
Thank you so much. And it's truly an honor to be here and to share our work, which really was made possible because of the collaboration between Mayo Clinic and Optum Labs. And I really think Maywish, and really grateful for her summary of the data, but I think I really can't stress enough how unique the data are in terms of their breadth and depths and our ability to answer really a wide range of questions that are important to our patients. So I'm grateful and excited to walk you through one project that we did over about a 5-year period, doing a deep dive into really the natural history and drivers of acute diabetes complications. And this work, I think, really not only demonstrates how we can use these data for maximal benefit of our patients, but really impact change, I think, at the healthcare system level. So again, grateful for the opportunity today. Just brief disclosures. I think this work was supported by the NIH, AARP, as well as Mayo Clinic. And we have other awards that also fund work using Optum Labs data, but I will not be sharing those today. So I think first, why diabetes? Why are we focusing on this, and what is our question? So I think most of you in the audience probably have been touched by diabetes in some way. About 1 out of every 7 US adults is living with diabetes. And that includes 29% of adults who are 65 and over. The impact of diabetes is felt more strongly in our underserved communities, with 17% of Black Americans and Hispanic Americans living with diabetes. It's the 7th leading cause of death in the US, but is also a major contributor to other leading causes of death, including heart disease and cancer. And diabetes itself cost the US economy $327 billion in 2017, and likely a lot more recently. So it's really 1 out of every 4 healthcare dollars in the US is spent caring for people living with diabetes. And for the individual person living with diabetes, that translates to almost $17,000 per year in extra medical expenditures. So when we think about diabetes, there's 2 primary types, and I'll give you an overview because it impacts some of the work that we did and what we found. The vast majority, about 90% of people who are living with diabetes have type 2 diabetes. It's the causes for type 2 diabetes are complicated, multifactorial, and interrelated, but you can really think of them as being driven by insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction often in the setting of obesity, as well as genetic predisposition. Insulin resistance leads to high blood sugar levels, also called hyperglycemia, as well as high insulin levels and increased inflammation. So all these things together cause diabetes, and then cause a vicious cycle of high blood sugars and complications. When we think about the complications of diabetes, they can be divided into 2 general categories. They're the acute complications, basically the symptoms of either very high or very low blood sugar levels that happen right now. Diabetes itself has high blood sugars, but when we treat diabetes with medications to lower blood sugars, we can overshoot, causing low blood sugars. So low blood sugars are always something that we cause to our patients. And this happens right now, depending on what my patient's blood sugar levels are. But then over a prolonged period of time of blood sugars being high, That takes its toll as well. And patients develop a wide series of complications, really as a cumulative effect of years and decades of living with diabetes, if the blood sugar is consistently high. And those include heart disease, stroke, peripheral vascular disease, kidney disease, eye disease and blindness, pain, and other complications. So as you can see, uncontrolled diabetes really impacts every organ system in the body, and that can cause problems both now and in the future. Type 1 diabetes is caused by a completely different mechanism. So type 1 diabetes affects about 5% of people who are living with diabetes, and that's caused by the body's inability to make insulin. Because there is no insulin, and insulin is required to use blood sugar, to use sugar in the blood as fuel for the body, sugar accumulates. So patients also have high blood sugar levels. But the cause of it is almost the opposite of type 2 diabetes. And a single person can almost have both types at the same time, depending on their situation. But irrespective of the cause of type 2 diabetes, the complications are the same. Patients can have very high blood sugar levels if they're not lowered enough. They can have low blood sugar levels if they're lowered too much, and then over time, they develop the same kinds of complications. Both very high and very low blood sugars in the acute time can be fatal, and they increase the risk of these long-term complications down the road. So in diabetes management, when we started this work, most of the focus has been on these chronic complications, as well as avoiding the very high blood sugar levels that can cause patients to develop, diabetic coma and potentially die. There was starting to be recognition that we should also avoid hypoglycemia because it's something that we cause and can also be fatal. But there was not a lot of understanding about who develops these acute complications. What are the risk factors and how do we prevent them? So that is the work that we wanted to do. And overall, just thinking about our overall research program, our goal is to prevent all of these diabetes complications, both acute and chronic, so that our patients live the healthiest lives possible. And to prevent their complications, we need first to detect complications early so that we can intervene. We need to make sure that we monitor our patients closely so that we know how they're doing. We know what their blood sugars are. Blood sugars can be checked with a test called hemoglobin A1C, which is an average blood sugar level over 3 months. That's what we do in the clinic. And then patients can check blood sugars themselves, which is their blood sugar right now. And that can be done through either finger sticks or a continuous glucose monitor. So we need to make sure that our patients can check their blood sugars and that we're monitoring them. We need to treat their blood sugar levels. And we need to treat them appropriately so patients are not overtreated, having low blood sugars, or undertreated, having high blood sugars. We also need to use the right medications because not all diabetes medications are created equal, and some are associated with less risk of acute and chronic complications than others. So we need to make sure that we use the right medication for the right patient. And ultimately, we need to make sure that what we do for our patients is person-centered, it's equitable, and it's aligned with our patients' goals, preferences, and their situation. So when we started this work almost 6 years ago now, our question was, are people living with diabetes truly receiving high-quality care? What are the gaps and what do we need to do about it? So this shows you a trend of the rates of those severe hypoglycemic in dotted lines and hyperglycemic in solid lines events in people living with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes over time. So looking at the last decade. And remember, this is the number of emergency department visits and hospitalizations per 1,000 people with diabetes. And there's over 30 million people with diabetes in the US. So even if the numbers may seem low when we think about on the population level and just how many people this touches, I think the toll is staggering. And what you can see is despite all the advances in diabetes management, despite new technologies like continuous glucose monitors and pumps, despite new medications, the rates of complications are not improving. And in fact, they may be getting worse. So in people with type 1 diabetes, we see a consistent and significant rise in the number of those severe hyperglycemic events, and no improvement in the rates of hypoglycemic events. In people with type 2 diabetes, we did see a reassuring, small but reassuring decline in those hypoglycemic events. And that was reassuring because the community really has focused on avoiding overtreatment. But what was worrisome is that at the same time, we saw a rise in the hyperglycemic events, suggesting that as we focus on avoiding low blood sugars, we may be causing our patients to have highs, rather than really striving for appropriate care. And these events are not harmless. So we looked at the risk of dying within 30 days of having these events. And you can see that, one, there was no change over time, which is disappointing with all the advances that should have happened in diabetes care. In patients with type 1 diabetes, mortality was less common after these events, with about 0.2% of people who have this event dying within 30 days. For patients with type 2 diabetes, the risk was about 10-fold higher. And you can see that almost 2, and the rates did go up over time, that 2%, so 1 out of every 50 people with diabetes who have a severe hypoglycemic event or a severe hyperglycemic event will die within 30 days. Thinking about the millions of people living with diabetes and these events being completely preventable with optimal care, this is concerning, and I think a call for action for understanding what can and should we be doing better to help our patients. So who experiences these events? The rest of our work really focused on understanding the drivers of these events, and then what can we do to prevent them. So first, who experiences hypoglycemia? And I kind of put the papers that came out of this work on the bottom in case you want to take a deeper look. But at the high level, patients, this is not surprising, patients who have low blood sugars are the ones who are overtreated or who are treated with medications that predispose them to low blood sugars, like insulin or sulfonylureas, especially if they have other risk factors. Patients who are older, who have multiple comorbidities or high clinical complexity. Patients who are Black, who live in in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation, are underinsured or low household income. So again, we see that it's things that we do to our patients in terms of overtreatment and the structural barriers to care, structural racism, and other disparities that really cause the cycle of suboptimal care and preventable complications. We saw the same things for severe hyperglycemia. Patients who are undertreated are the ones who experience the severe hyperglycemic crisis. This time, it was mostly patients who are young, rather than those who are older, as in hypoglycemia. But again, those who have high clinical complexity and those who experience structural and socioeconomic barriers to care. And because treatment intensity is something that we as clinicians have a direct control over, we did a deeper dive into understanding kind of what we are doing to our patients that we can change to reduce the risk of complications. In our very earliest work, I was actually wanting to see if we don't test our patients enough. And what we found is that we actually test some patients too often. We found that we, as clinicians, sometimes over-test our patients. We check their hemoglobin A1C more than they need based on how well their diabetes is controlled. But then we act on small changes in their A1C, ultimately adding extra medications, even when our patients may not need to. That leads to overtreatment, and that leads to hypoglycemia. So even things that may seem innocuous, like testing, can start us off on a spiral of overtreatment. We did find that there are patients who seem stable who still experience deterioration of glycemic control. So it's important really to use data-driven approaches to understand whether our patients will or will not deteriorate, so we can intensify treatment in the right patient, so that we don't cause hypoglycemia in patients who are at risk for it, but we don't lead to hyperglycemia by undertreating. So I think the data allowed us to understand the different phenotypes or types of patients who would benefit from different intensities of treatment. We also found really a profound mismatch of overtreatment and undertreatment. So it's not that we're undertreating patients and we're overtreating patients. It's that we're misaligning treatment intensity to the patient's benefit. So here you can see we looked at patients with type 2 diabetes, either who are by age or by their clinical complexity. This is a count of their comorbidities with a higher index, showing a limited time a shorter life expectancy. So what you would expect is that as blood sugar level gets higher, going to the right, younger patients should be treated with insulin. All of these patients need to be treated with insulin. For older patients, they shouldn't be treated as intensively. So we should basically see the lines getting darker in this corner, right? Young and healthy patients need to be treated more intensively than older, frailer patients who are at risk for low blood sugars. And we see the opposite. We see young, healthy patients undertreated, but likely explaining the reasons for their severe hyperglycemic crises. And then we found older, frailer patients overtreated, likely explaining their hypoglycemic crises. We also found that patients aren't receiving the medications that they're most likely to benefit from. So there's certain medication classes that reduce the risks of complications. These are GLP-1 receptor agonists in patients with heart disease and kidney disease, or SGLT2 inhibitors in patients with heart failure, kidney disease. And again, we found that patients who have those health conditions aren't getting those medications. The patients who do have those complications are not getting the medications, and patients who do not have the complications, they are getting those medications. So when we think about the scarce resources and high costs of these medications, we want to align. We want people who benefit from them to get them, and make sure that we align medications with who benefits, and that's unfortunately not what we found. We also found clinical inertia, that when patients experience low blood sugars, we don't take the steps that are needed to prevent these events. We don't deliver those patients aren't more likely to receive education, to get glucagon, which is an emergency treatment for hypoglycemia, or to start continuous glucose monitoring. And these disparities, this paradox of benefit and risk, is again most profound in older patients with Medicare Advantage as compared to private health plans, and then non-white patients and low-income patients, again, showing all those structural barriers to optimal care. So I think using the Optum Labs data made this uniquely possible because we were able to examine diabetes management, all aspects of diabetes management across the entire US, not singling out a single healthcare system or a single physician, but really to understand the current state of diabetes care across the nation to show us what do we need to do different to have the biggest impact on patient health. So this work really, I think, changed the paradigm of how we care for people living with diabetes. Instead of focusing just on blood sugar levels, over the past several years, the paradigm has changed into focusing on complications, making sure that we treat patients as individuals, and we strive to prevent both acute and chronic complications of diabetes. And clinical practice guidelines increasingly recognize the importance of that person-centered approach. It's not about the numbers, it's about patient health. We've also worked to develop and test care delivery models that improve access and quality of diabetes care, that address those social determinants of health to make sure that all our patients can access the care that they need. And that the way that we assess quality of diabetes care encompasses all domains of quality, not only effectiveness, but also equity timeliness, safety, and patient-centeredness. So, just really grateful for, I think, the recognition of this team effort that was a partnership between our research group and Optum Labs, really putting our heads together to understand the barriers to health in people living with diabetes across the U.S., and then pointing, suggesting solutions and things that we can and should be doing differently to make sure that everyone can live the healthiest lives possible. So that is all that I have, and excited for your questions.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate you sharing about your research. One thing I think you do really well is communicate what the impact is, like who benefits, why it's important. So thank you again. I want to bring in Jules Polonetsky. He is the CEO of the Future of Privacy Forum. We're going to have a discussion for a little while, but if you do have questions, if you're in the audience, please hold on to those. We will have time for a Q&A, but I'll pass it over to Jules.
Thanks, Shay, and thanks to the Optum team and the research team. Let me say this, we are thrilled to try to shine some light and attention on this important research. We are taking ads in the New York Times, in Science, online. And the reason we're doing it is because we do think there is a problem. And on one side of the debate, we have models like this. Clearly, we all understand critical health research like this, done with care, with responsibility, with oversight, with privacy, with security. We all want to see it happen. We want to see it develop. We want to see, more of it. We also see a demand for access to new kinds of data, sometimes health-related data that might not be covered by HIPAA, that might be lifestyle data, that might be other available data sets that could be brought in. Some of it is brought in this opportunity, geographic information, other demographic information that perhaps isn't captured directly in the files, but helps researchers broaden and answer the questions. But we see data about people's fitness. We see data about people's websites. We see a whole range of non-HIPAA covered data that legislators are quite properly moving to add privacy protections to. We see representatives like Trahan and many others who want important questions explored, the effect of platforms on society. And those today are operating in a very different space, right? It's not data that's been collected under healthcare laws. And there's been a lot of debate and struggle to figure out how to encourage, mandate, force, in our hope, encourage a much broader sector to learn from the kind of careful research and data access that you're providing so that we can have similarly smart, privacy-friendly research happening in other sectors. So what I want to ask you, because there are tensions, right? And it's not wrong that there are tensions that data might not be available because of a limitation, on it, and we've got to do the best research we can. How did the restrictions, which are, I think, all important and necessary, limit in any way sort of your ideal dream of broader data that might have been once you sit down and you design the research, you learn that, well, it really might have been nice to have X, and that data is there. And if we could only bring it in, we would now know more about different subpopulations or other information that's not captured in the clinical setting. Can you help us understand sort of the tension? And again, I don't think it's a bad thing. There is that tension, but I think understanding exactly how to tweak those dials so that accurate, reproducible, quality research emerges, and the appropriate restrictions are there as well. Can you give some sense? I mean, was all the type of information you needed, perfectly accessible? Did de-identification limit any ability to look for bias in the data set or, do any of the analysis? Welcome. Give us some sense of any of the the valid tension between access to data and the limitations that may have been part of the research considerations?
No, I think that's a really, really important question. Although, as a caveat, I think if you ask a researcher if they ever have enough data, I don't think anyone will ever say yes. But I think it is absolutely attention. Just to give an example from our work, given how the disparities and the structural barriers to care and health outcomes, I think it's really important to look at the intersection between the different levels of social determinants of health and how they impact care delivery and health outcomes. But we are not able to get all of those levels at the same time for multiple reasons. I think one, there is a concern for patient privacy, because when we do have granular clinical data, including some health conditions which are rare, and then we overlay kind of patient demographic characteristics, which we do have, and then if we overlay their granular, where they live, or what are the resources that are available to them, who are the physicians that take care of them, which hospitals do they receive care in, right? Once you add all of those layers, then it is possible to identify people. And that's why, when we work with Optum Labs data, they have very strict privacy controls. So they do have a lot of that data, but they cannot give it to us all at once. So we do have to be strategic about what is our specific question and what is the combination of variables we can look at to still answer our questions, but maintain patient privacy. But there's also kind of a feasibility question, because some data may be possible to bring in, but they may be so project specific that while I could do it for my project, it's not reasonable for me to ask, the data source, Optum, to do it just for me, because I can't access the data, again, to ensure data privacy, that becomes more challenging. So I think the Optum, they kind of take a bigger view and they maintain the data privacy, and we do what we can. I still think it's been part of the reason this data has been so incredible to work with is that there are more linkages that have been done than I think I've seen in any other data asset. So we're able to do a lot, but there is kind of that balance between maintaining privacy, making sure that all the data linkages are done by someone else and not necessarily the researcher, to make sure that privacy is protected by an objective party, and it's done rigorously. So there's that balance.
I'll ask this question perhaps on the Optum side. There's probably a vast number of researchers that would line up and have wish lists of work they'd want to do. You can't economically, practically, with adequate oversight and adequate review, take all comers. And obviously you're working with a very qualified researcher who you've got to trust in a relationship, and even then have both legal and technical controls. You heard Shay talk about our goal of broadening the access to a broader range of researchers. So maybe researchers who aren't at the most elite branded, wealthiest institutions, but are obviously well qualified and perhaps have real deep research interests that haven't been met well. I wonder your thoughts on, does this scale? You've a very significant investment, and you've got, a broader range of researchers, that are working carefully. We're struggling with, again, on sort of the broader questions, right, of how do we encourage more organizations to do this type of sharing, but to also do it in an even more inclusive way. And clearly there are barriers. There have to be relationships. It doesn't seem like there's a very efficient system today. If there's a great researcher at a high quality university, but maybe not as well resourced, they maybe don't have a relationship, with the organization. What are your thoughts on how one might scale so that a more inclusive research community has a better shot at accessing what practically can be not only socially important research but career-making research as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from a corporate perspective, there are a couple of things that I would kind of advise or kind of look for in terms of those best practices. And we already started talking about some of this, right? The first is, of course, to understand those benefits and risks. And then a couple of the lessons that I shared, which was having that clear data sharing policy that can outline what can be shared, the safeguards that are in place, and establishing those data sharing agreements that outline those terms. And then, of course, of paramount importance are those data security requirements and privacy protections. We often see, graduate students that kind of come in at the ground floor that are working, or like Rosalina, when she started, was working under her mentor. And so some of those things can help develop those relationships as well.
Thank you. I think we're opening up the Q&A, and I'm going to see, so if you have a question, hopefully the Q&A has just started to show up, and guide me to where and when I should be seeing any questions. While I wait and encourage those who are participating to do so, I will ask a much briefer question than my long and usual setup. And maybe let me just focus specifically on the de-identification kind of holy grail challenges of, there is always a risk utility trade-off when it comes to de-identification. And here, because this is a very structured environment, the risk is lower, the linkages are, being done as described. But I guess maybe on the Optum side, do you see trade-offs that have to be made given some of the challenges of ensuring that data sets are de-identified? I think Rosalina described, to some degree, some. But how do you juggle the reality that perfect protection here would result in data sets that are not as useful, and as you provide more utility and rely more on legal controls or security controls, but not perhaps statistical, mathematical certainty? Welcome thoughts on that.
Sure. So, you're right. Rosalina started touching on this, but, of course, there are those legal requirements and ethical considerations that are just critical. And then continuing with that, those controls that are in place are some of those factors that play into that balance of, encryption, secure storage, and these comprehensive safeguards are really those factors that would help evaluate that utility for the research while maintaining the protection and privacy of the individuals.
Yeah, and I want to just quickly chime in. I think one of the reasons why I think that hasn't hindered our research as much is just because of how big the data are and how common I think the diabetes, the disease I work with, is, because even though all cells, with fewer than 11 people are masked, when you have a data set that has 140 million people and 14% might have diabetes, that's still enough people. So no matter what data we want to look at and how we want to slice it, we're still going to have enough patients to be able to preserve their de-identification. So I think the privacy rules don't hinder you as much when you just have a lot of data. And to comment maybe on the other question about, I think one of the strengths of our partnership has been that, when we started working together, I was brand new on staff. Was my first foray into health services research. So definitely having this be an opportunity to build a career and grow, I think, and start off on this has been really invaluable, and being able to be a part of this process from the beginning. So I do think that it was kind of, but obviously I do think it should be broadly available. And I think these rich data in general, there should be mechanisms for others to use and do important work in.
Great. Thanks, Shay.
All right. We have a two-part question. So I think one is probably directed towards Dr. McCoy. One is directed to Dr. Kasim. What advice would you give a company that is interested in sharing data for research? And similarly, what advice would you give to researchers that are interested in accessing corporate data but are not sure where to start. So whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Sure. Great question. The advice is, and it might feel a little redundant, but really kind of understanding those benefits and risks from the beginning, establishing agreements, clear data sharing agreements that can outline what's required in terms of data sharing, data type, security requirements, privacy protections, obviously using secure methods for data sharing and storage, anonymizing data where possible, and then developing a clear data sharing policy that has those safeguards in place. Those are the highlights of the advice.
Yeah, and I think for this, for the investigators, it means having a really good understanding about your research question and what are the variables and the data that you need in order to answer that question. Because I think as scientists, we always want more, and we want more data and more variables, but that is usually not possible. So thinking really critically about what do you need to answer the specific question that you have. And then when you do reach out to a potential partner, to make sure that they understand what you need and why, and that you understand their data. Because I think the challenge with using real world data for research comes with not fully understanding each other, and that miscommunication can lead to really wrong variables being considered, and then your conclusions may not be what you think they are. So even for clinicians like myself to have a deep understanding of the data, even if you're not programming it, but like what is it, and for them to know what you're trying to do so that they can help you figure out your best data and study design. And it's having that partnership and communication that will make the best research.
Thank you both. We have another one. It is also a two-part question. With both the technology and legal and policy landscape changing quickly, what are some of the challenges of making sure researchers and corporations are still abiding by the newer or even reduced health data protections? Second part, what are some recommendations to policymakers that you'd recommend to streamline this process? Whoever wants to go for it.
I mean, I can say that, for my perspective, I guess it's easier for me because Optum deals with all of those complexities, but that's in part why I think it's so critical to have that good relationship and communication so that they know what is truly essential for you to be able to do your work, what may not be, how do you really compromise to make sure that you can still do high quality, impactful work while abiding by the rules and regulations. And then for policymakers, and I would love, just like, in research, we have data sharing requirements, making sure that there's transparency in research. I would love to see really more, not just guidance to do that for the people who own the data, but also assistance on how to do that so that it's not onerous for them to do, and to really lower I think the bar for data sharing and making it available for research.
I can just add a couple of thoughts here. So, with these great questions, I think the consideration that goes through my mind in terms of challenges and opportunities is really around data quality. So as those data sets become larger and more complex, having those good or better or best methods for data cleaning, validation, standardization. And then, obviously there's a tremendous opportunity here to accelerate scientific progress through these collaborations across disciplines and institutions. So I think those are key factors that will need to be considered as these questions get answered.
Thank you. Let me close with a couple of quick thoughts. I mentioned our appreciation that the University of Florida was one of our runner-ups, and I just want to sort of reiterate one of the goals for the expansion of the pool of researchers beyond the most elite institutions, those in the Northeast or others that are, doing well at being able to open up the door to these conversations. And so that's something I think we are eager to work on and eager to flag to you all here on the panel and in the audience. You mentioned data quality, and let me just set up just a couple of final remarks around that. Obviously, if one's doing healthcare research, and we understand how important collecting data accurately in clinical care and the challenges of doing so, are, and the expertise one needs in working and understanding that data. I think what isn't as well appreciated is that the biggest challenge, as we've been talking to a range of companies and saying, well, why don't you? Like, why don't you support science? What is your problem? And of course, privacy comes up, and I think we all think that between technical controls and legal incentives, there is a path forward, whether or not some of the state laws that are being passed that are regulating research outside of the typical IRB world are making it more complicated. I think is another challenge and another story. A lot of these state laws are mandating that research be in the public interest, which is, of course, a good idea, except different state political leaders today have very different ideas about what is in the public interest, particularly when it comes to things like healthcare and other critical services. And so, we have a long time definition of research that certainly has politics to it, but has years of understanding of how to support advancing science in a way that isn't as politicized. But data quality, let's take a look at, much of the data that is collected, say, perhaps by platforms, which has been collected for a particular purpose, right? Liking something, sharing something, so on and so forth. And then we're coming to it, and we're not necessarily studying how well it counted the likes. We're saying, let's learn about foreign influence. Let's learn about, addictive, qualities. The data quality challenge we've come to understand is very significant. Location data, the runner-up example here was location data focused. The location data, isn't collected for a clinical purpose. It's not collected sometimes for an emergency services purpose, right? It's collected for very specific commercial purposes. And we even understand, I think, that when an organization or a company that has a data set and wants to do something different, very often they create another data set and another data set. I spent many years as a chief privacy officer, and my biggest challenge was finding that we had multiple copies of the same data sets because different units needed minor differences in what they were seeking to do. And so they had to, literally collect a whole different set of data. So in the playbook that Shay referred to, and I refer folks that are interested to it, we try to walk through and identify that, yes, there are legal issues. Are you allowed to share this data? There are ethical issues. Would people be happy with their data being used, if they worked with a particular commercial service or, had a certain kind of care, being used. But very significantly, we learned that the expense, the level of work to make sure that a data set is actually fit for purpose and that the researchers understand what's in it, are able to make the right decisions about how they use it, not trivial. So this is hard, grinding work. Kudos to the Optum teams for kind of making the investments so that there is a data set suitable for a wide range of research. It's not something that a broad range of organizations outside of very specific sectors where there's been a long history of research are able to do without real significant long-term expert partnership and collaboration. And so we're going to continue working in this direction because we do think the end goal is advancing science, advancing social good, but it's certainly not as easy as just do it because it's the right thing to do, just do it because we want to study, the bad effects on this part of the community or that part of the community. It's a combination of law, policy, security, privacy, ethics, expense, and significant commitment by organizations that have the capability to make sure that the right kinds of data sets are even available with the immense work done to make sure it is suitable. So we hope that by applauding those who are succeeding, we can send the message to the rest of the community. And we thank everybody who joined us today. And thanks to Shay and the team. If you want to get involved and you are not, we are eager to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.